going to go straight into it. But I told y'all not to let me forget about the lament and the praise thing. I just think this is really, really interesting, and I didn't tell y'all last week. Okay, remember how we talked about the 5 different books in the Psalms? Okay, the 5 different sections, and how they have the editorial note at the end and all of that. So the first 3 Psalms are overwhelmingly full and dominated by laments. So the first 3 books. The first 3 books of the 5 books of the Psalms are dominated by lamenting. And then the last 2 books are overwhelmingly dominated by praise, which I just think is very much evidence of the reason they were canonized and the way in which they were is teaching us something about our prayers. And as it was the prayer book of God's people, it's even just as this lament turns to praise, the whole book of Psalms turns from lament to praise. So I just thought that was very interesting and helps us kind of focus our prayers. It is right and good. The Psalms is an incredible gift given to us to be able to express our pain and our sorrow and our grief and even sometimes our anger. So those emotions and experiences are not from Satan themselves necessarily, except that when they do not turn you to Christ, now you've kind of handed them over to the evil one to use in your life, right? So the Psalms gives us permission to experience those things, but we always have to look for the turn in our own hearts toward praise. Okay, so as your question tonight at your tables says, have you ever experienced a time of desperation such as the psalmist describes in 77, where everything around you just seems to give absolute evidence that the issue is hopeless? Maybe the information continues to come in from the doctor from worse to worse. Or maybe there's a sin struggle that you've tried desperately to overcome in your own power, and you desire truly to honor Christ in this, to find freedom in it, and you truly love him and those around you, but you just continue to fall back in again and again. Or maybe you find yourself simply just in a marriage that has long since felt much besides pragmatism and just practical interactions with one another to get the job done of doing life, but it lacks passion, tenderness, or mission. And you feel that as you cry out to God about these things, there's just silence that comes back to you. Or maybe you just don't feel any growth, any experience of the spiritual work in your life that God's supposed to do that you believe you see in the lives of others around you. I want us tonight to be able to go to 77, and from all the work and the study that you put into it and what God speaks to us through his word tonight, we could grab hold of the anchor of Christ and his word, and we could say with the psalmist, as he does in 13 and 14, your way, God, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? You are the God who works wonders. You have made known your might among the peoples. Our first stop tonight in Psalm 77 is from the depths, the deepness of our sorrow, right? From the depths we lament. So that's our first stop on this journey, from the depths we lament. And we're going to look at verses 1 through 3. It says, I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me. In the day of my trouble I seek the Lord. In the night my hand is stretched out without wearying. My soul refuses to be comforted. When I remembered God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. So I looked back into kind of these words that are being used in this section, and what does it mean that when he remembers God, he moans? Like, shouldn't we have joy and awe when we remember God? So I wanted to find out a little bit more of what he was really experiencing as he wrote this. And so the closest rendering from original text would sound something like this. When I would fain remember God, I was disquieted. When I would fain muse in prayer, my spirit fainted. So fain means to deeply desire, and muse means to deeply think. So if I would call it a paraphrase, but a paraphrase typically means you've shortened it. This is longer, but this is how I grappled through. What does this mean? And I kind of rewrote that section, and it says this. When I deeply desired to remember God, I was disquieted, or I was disturbed. When I would strongly desire to think deeply in prayer, my spirit fainted. My spirit was overcome. As I meditated on what seemed to be God's abandonment of me, I was overcome by my own reasonings of what seemed to be God's mistreatment of me as his child. So even when we cannot hear, we trust that we've been heard. So has anybody had that phone conversation like I had a few weeks ago where I'm pouring out my heart to my sister in Christ and I'm talking about this deep thing and I kind of get to a place where I'm taking a breath and then there's that awkward silence? Yeah. And you're like, did I say something wrong? Did I talk too long? What have I done? And then still there's silence and then you look at your phone and someone's calling in and it's her. And you're like, oh, we dropped the call. So you think you weren't heard. You began to feel as though no one was listening on the other end because you kind of talked for a long time. And you waited for a long time saying, can you hear me? Hello? Hello? And then you pick up the phone and she says, no, I heard everything you said. You just couldn't hear me. I think that's a lot of times how it is for us as Christ's children. We're speaking out, we're crying out, we're lamenting. And because we can't hear right now, in space and time, we don't feel that we've been heard. But the psalmist states confidently, I have been heard. When I cry out to God, he will hear me. But when we look at verses 7 through 9, it doesn't seem like he thinks he's hearing from God, does it? Somebody read 7 through 9 out loud for me.
Will the Lord, go ahead. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Are his promises at an end for all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in his anger shut up his compassion? Selah.
So that does not sound like a man who thinks he's hearing words back from the Lord right now, or he's seeing the hand of God in his life. He feels like he's pouring his heart out and nothing's coming back on the other end of the line. So the next kind of break stop, so our first break stop was even when we cannot hear, we must trust that we've been heard. And then even without comfort, words, or strength, we must persist in prayer. So look at verses 3 and 4. They say this. We already kind of talked about this section. When I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. You hold my eyes open. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. So he finds himself both sleepless and speechless. Have you ever been there? Mm-hmm. Sleepless and speechless. So many of you know that I like to start my year off kind of to kind of rewrite some notes for myself about how to pray over my family that year. I'll just begin asking the Lord what to pray for this child. Where is there a character issue that I need to begin praying over? What are some verses that I can pray over this struggle or this praise, right? But just asking him where to lead me. And so I often do that. And the other day, I think week before last, I was going through a drawer of stuff that needed to be cleaned out. And I came across an old prayer journal. And it was from, I believe, 2013. I don't want to stop and do the math. That'd take a long time. But that I found, I turned the page and I found a prayer that I'd written out for Benjamin. And the prayer, so first of all, for that couple of years space and time, I just really began to be first frustrated and then turned to prayer about my little Ben, who every time I asked him to do something, I got, oh. And then anytime he went to do it, it took him an hour longer than it should. He was quite lazy with his attitude, was not interested in helping. He would usually be excited and happy to like go somewhere with dad so he could work but not work. But he just did not have that work ethic. That was not a character trait that he was possessing at the time. So I began asking the Lord that year and had some verses there that I was praying over Ben to begin to build in Benjamin a work ethic that both honored Christ and blessed those around him. And so if you have ever had the experience today of working with that same Benjamin, if there's been an answered prayer in his life, it is that. And it's literally, so I want us to realize when you don't feel heard, persist. You are being heard. And neither Kevin nor I can point back to a space and time where we say, this is when, and this is how God gave Benjamin a work ethic that honors him, right? I can't point to that thing. It wasn't like all of a sudden I said, hey, God answered this prayer. It was in hindsight, quite a few years later, where I can look back and say, that is the hand of God in his life. He has answered that prayer. So persist in your prayers, even when we see that he has no comfort, and he has no words, and he has no sleep, he continues to persist in prayer. Do not give up. Even when it's been 25 years, even when it's been 30 years, even when you feel at the end of your rope and you have nothing left to give, do not give up in your prayers. And then our next stop is, so our I'm trying to say like our first stop on the journey and then break checks, okay? To help me move us through the passage. So our first stop on the journey was from the depths we lament. Our second stop is by reasoning we remember. And so I'm going to look at verses 7 through 9. His questioning. Will the Lord spurn forever? I'm going to read it again. And never again be favorable. Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Are his promises at an end for all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? So we need to feel comfortable and confident in asking these questions that sometimes feel almost irreverent or disrespectful of our sovereign God, because he knows we have them anyways. And so when we cover them over and we refuse to be honest about these struggles and this trial and this strife and this grief that we feel, we're not moving anywhere spiritually, right? We're not going to hear from him when we won't speak to him about these matters. And so it's right, and that's what we already talked about. The Psalms gives us that permission, and it actually puts words on it for us. Even anger, it gives us words for it. It's that we're to not sin in our anger, not that we should never experience the feeling of that struggle, right? Okay, and then our next break check is remember the quiet. Okay, remember. There's 4 things that he's remembering, and I've just kind of titled them this way. Did a lot of you mark 4 remembers in your passage? Mm-hmm. Okay, and then I underlined mine. Okay, I had the remembers boxed in blue, but then like meditate and ponder things that kind of have to do with the mind going back and thinking on and kind of staying on for a minute. I underlined those in blue just to help me see that that's kind of a similar connotation to that word in this text, if that makes sense. So he is remembering 4 different things, and this is kind of how I titled them. He's remembered the quiet, the joy, God's work, and God's wonders. So he remembers the quiet. He goes back and he says, I said, let me remember. Oh, no, that's the joy. Let's see. Verse 3, when I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. So this is in the phase of the psalm where he's not feeling heard. He's crying out to God, but he's not feeling heard. Has anybody ever noticed that the silence of God can often be very deafening? It's overpowering. You want to cover your ears because you can't hear from God. So he remembers the quiet, and then he remembers the joy. Where is the joy that he's remembering? What would I be pointing? It doesn't say the word joy. Worship.
My song in the night.
My song in the night. Terry, yours says my worship in the night. Yep. My song in the night, my worship in the night. And then where's his works or his deeds?
11.
So would y'all say 7 and 11?
11. Yeah.
11. Okay. So he's remembering the works of God, the deeds of God, and his wonders. Where do y'all see wonders? 11
On
and
14 too.
Yep, 11 and 14. And then I underlined with just the same color. So where I boxed wonders and put some rays on it, I underlined with the same color mighty deeds, because that's probably a similar idea there. And then wonders again. And then I actually took this wonders, I put it here in my own notes, because this is the wonders of God. When God parts the Red Sea and God brings the flood to Noah, all of these things are wonders that God performs. And so just for my own note taking, I was noticing that he's talking about the wonders of God, and then he actually describes some of the wonders of God. Okay, so he remembers the 4 things. And one of the things I want us to remember from this is that remembering our joy, going back to that good, holy, righteous, celebrative time in our lives when things were right and good before the Lord, and in our relationship and in our families and in our child's life who's now in a sin struggle, whatever it is, going back to that place and remembering the joy can wake us up. So remembering the joy of that place can oftentimes awaken us to the joy of God's present work in our lives today. Because a lot of times when you're just lamenting and you're staying broken down and beaten up about the thing that you're in front of right now, you're not able to rejoice. You're actually not even able to see the good. I've been in situations where I've had to continually remind somebody, but that's not what's happening today. Like, you are living in the marriage from before your husband committed his life to Christ. I've had to have that relationship because they continue to feel and look back at all the bad and all the ugly and all the rough stuff, and they were not allowing their own sight to see the joy of today and the work that God has done in their life, their husband's life today. So it may not be where we want it to be, but a lot of times when we stay in our laments, all alone, cooped up, lamenting, then we don't see the work God's doing right now in front of our face. So remember the joy. That's the biggest thing for me on the remember. Okay, I'm trying to go real fast again. Apparently we're going to do this every week where I talk really fast. So the third stop on our road to Psalm 77 tonight is by faith we keep moving. Just had anybody heard the phrase, suck it up, buttercup? Sometimes you got to just keep moving, right? So by faith we keep moving, and even in the dark, we must follow. Verses 18 and 19 is where we have let me read, hold on. Is that what I meant to put? I'm going to read, we'll read, let's read 16 through 19. When the waters saw you, O God, when the waters saw you, they were afraid. Indeed, the deep trembled, the clouds poured out water, the skies gave forth thunder. Your arrows flashed on every side. The crash of your thunder was in the whirlwind. Your lightnings lighted up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your way was through the sea. So, again, I'm just kind of picturing, if we're talking about the skies being lighted up with lightning, typically we don't really notice that if it's daytime, right? So if the sky is being lit with arrows and with the lightning that God is performing in the sky, it's probably a dark time, right? And so as the psalmist is lamenting, we know that he's also talking about an actual dark time in his life, not just remembering the darkness of the days of the flood coming. And so even when it's dark, he had to continue walking forward. And then we walk straight into the issue of the Red Sea. And when we get to the Red Sea, they're going to have to follow without sight, right? So my next point is that do not allow yourself to turn away from the treacherous, redemptive way of the Lord. So in verses 19 through 20, it says, your way was through the sea, not around the sea, not over a bridge, right? Your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. So I thought about just thinking about this treacherous, terrifying way of the Lord and how we're supposed to just step into some things in our life that seem to be just that, treacherous. How could this possibly be from God? And it's terrifying. I thought of C.S. Lewis's Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Who has seen that movie? Yep. Okay. Seriously, there's that many of you that have not seen The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You need to see it. Yes. Okay, it's they're all really, really good movies. Okay, so in that, there was a conversation I remembered, so I looked it up, and it is between Mr. Beaver and Susan, okay? Yep. And this is what it says. It starts with Mr. Beaver speaking to Susan. Aslan is a lion. Oh, said Susan, I thought that he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall be rather nervous to meet a lion. Safe, Mr. Beaver said. Who said anything about safe? But he is good, and he is king. And I think that we have to remember that in our lives when he takes you to a spot and he says, hey, here's a Red Sea. And you have thousands of people and babies and children and livestock and food and all the things that you've got to get from here to there with. And by the way, there's an army chasing you with chariots, with mighty military power on your tail, and you're at the sea, and he says, go on, follow me. This is where I'm leading. My way is not the safe way. My way is not the easy way, but my way is through the waters. And as he says to us in 13, his way is holy. So even when it's terrifying, that does not mean it's not from the Lord. Okay? So don't give up because things are terrifying. It could be exactly what you're supposed to do and exactly the way you're supposed to walk. And then the last thing I see is that his footprints can be found in the footsteps of others. So when they felt they couldn't see God's hand because they're literally facing a sea of water, their families, all the things that they have with them, and an army behind them. They cannot see God's hand, but they do see Moses and Aaron. And Moses and Aaron step out in front of them. So the people of God are often led, even when we can't see his footprints, we're led by other people that God's placed in our lives whose footprints we can follow. And we can trust that his hand is in that. So don't forget to look for those people in your life. Oftentimes it just comes directly from his word. But when you are stuck, you feel you're at an impasse and you have nowhere to go, don't be afraid to look to the people of God, to reach out to people of God in your life, and to get them on board with you, praying through and helping you discern what should happen next in your life and in that decision. Okay? So that's a really short, compacted version of what I had written for tonight. What time are we at now, Tammy?
7:44.
7:44. Look at us. Okay. So, any other questions before we close? Lauren?
Can you recap with those points where just one last time?
Yes. Lauren is like if you ever miss your notes, text Lauren. And she'll give you a really great copy. Okay. By faith we keep moving. So that's I'll get this better as I get into it. I was just trying to give myself this time a way to move us through without saying my next point every single time. Okay. So our first stop on the road in 77 is by faith we keep moving. And in that, the brake checks are even in the dark we must follow. The treacherous, oh wait a minute, I backed y'all up.
Oh,
Yeah.
Lauren, did you just write that wrong? What I told you?
I was like, wait, what?
I'm so sorry.
No,
No,
you're
okay,
good. Go ahead.
back, that was the last stop. The first stop is from the depths we lament. From the depths we lament. And the first brake check there is, even when we cannot hear, we must trust that we've been heard.
Oh, there. That's that.
And then the next brake check is, even without comfort, words, or strength, we must persist in prayer.
Can you say that again?
Even without comfort, words, or strength, we must persist in prayer. And then the next stop is by reasoning we remember. So for me, that's Roman numeral 2. By reasoning we remember. And this is where we ask the questions that he already knows you have. Ask the questions that he already knows you have.
You need handouts.
Or, I mean, you don't have, this is not like, I mean, just, you're not getting, it's just my notes. Like my notes, if I hand it out to you, this is what they look like. Okay, so they're not, some of it will not make any sense to you because you're like, why is this arrow there? And why didn't she use Romans 8:26? And why, like, and so I actually said to Kevin, I was like, okay, what if after I do this, because y'all already know this is how my brain works. My brain does not work in black and white digital. So the fact that you're holding something that I did in black and white paper on Microsoft is a work of God. That is one of the wonders of God. Not in his word, but in my life. And so I can't play with the word and really grapple and study the word in that format. And so I have to do this. And I asked him, what if I were to try to put this back in the notes? He was like, not right now. You don't have time. You don't have time to do that while you're teaching. I can go back and after the class, or maybe on the plane to India, I can do that, but not like on an every week basis, because it would take me that much more time to do that, because it's like, I already love you, and I already did a labor of love, but it's like a really, yeah. So I could just make pictures of this, but I don't know if it would make sense.
You need a
So,
squeeze.
okay, where were we? Well, Jenna, will you just be my scribe? She's fixing to sort of do that for me in a lot of ways, so maybe she just needs to
Well,
like.
we need to meet beforehand.
Okay, so where were we? So by
By
reasoning we remember, ask the questions we already know he has. Remember the quiet, the joy, his work, and his wonders. Remember the quiet, your joy, his work, and his wonders. And then the last stop on this journey. By faith, we keep moving. By faith, we keep moving. The first brake check there is, even in the dark, we must follow. Don't turn away from the treacherous, redemptive way of the Lord is the next brake check. And then the last one is his footprints are found in the at times. At times, his footprints are found in the footsteps of others. There you go. All right? Okay, let me pray us out of here. Father God, thank you again for such a great night with these wonderful, beautiful women, Lord. I know I say that all the time, but they truly have a special place in my heart, and every week that we meet together is a super big deal. I know it is for Ari too, as she's teaching, Lord. This is a sweet group of ladies who desires to hear from you. We praise you that we have this opportunity, that we have the freedoms to do this type of thing, Lord, and we just ask that for every effort we put in, you would bless us with your presence and with your word and with the ability to actually take it and apply it to our lives. May we hear from you each time we gather. Thank you for all these women, all those who are not here tonight, all the prayer requests, Lord, all the things going on in our church family, Lord, new babies and hospital situations for Hannah and Emma and all the things that are happening, Lord. We could not name them all and not forget someone, God, but you know, and I ask that you would remind us to pray, and that as these groups have connected tonight, they would get the context, they would connect with one another, and truly be sisters who pray for one another. We thank you for all these things in Jesus' holy and precious name. Amen.
Did you say don't turn away from the truckers or just way over?
Yes.
Way
Wait.
over.